taking back with it chemicals, then the body just keeps concentrating those chemicals. So I think pulling extra bile out of through your enemas is probably a very good thing.
I wish that more of us were finding this process less foreign. Dr. Gonzalez had shared that this is an ancient process. This is not new. It's just that we're newly hearing that it's important.
Well, I think I was desensitized to it a bit because I heard when I was a kid that my grandmother was the head matron of a fever hospital in Montreal, and they used high colonic enemas as their form of detoxification. And I just thought, wow, that makes sense because, if someone has a bad fever, I mean, some people they find it even hard to drink when you have a fever. I mean, you may be unconscious, but with an enema, you can actually introduce water into the body. Some of that water is reabsorbed to hydrate the tissues, and then it pulls out the toxins. So to me, it's very simple and safe. I think there was one comment out of many, many comments on my coffee enema blog where someone said, oh, they didn't like it at all. It made them allergic to coffee. And this is one of these situations, and I've heard it many times, where the person just kept doing them and doing them and doing them. They didn't feel well, but they thought they should keep doing them. And I always say, look, if something doesn't feel right, stop it immediately and find something that feels better. Some people will, come back and blame their doctor for telling them to take a certain form of magnesium, and it'll give them diarrhea for a month, and then they'll say, look, you made me sick with all this magnesium, whereas, if the magnesium gives you the laxative effect, find a different type of magnesium.
I don't think I asked you about the calcium-magnesium relationship and what the actual percentage of what should be. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that I know in the nutritional literature, they used to talk about 2 parts of calcium to 1 part magnesium. But over the years, I found that at least 1-to-1 calcium magnesium, or even 2 parts magnesium to 1 part calcium. For example, I take magnesium and no calcium, and I get my calcium with my diet. So I don't know my ratio, but I just know how I feel, and I like the way I feel on that regime.
How does you being a naturopathic physician impact what you're doing today, since you were an MD first, right?
Well, actually, in my mind, I was always a naturopath, and the only reason I went into medicine first is because there were no naturopathic schools anywhere near me.
Where did you train?
In Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Dalhousie University. So this was a very strict, very conservative medical school, and I don't know how I kept through it, but
You've done well.
I would be making my own yogurt and just get ridiculed constantly, or I did an elective on acupuncture, and everybody thought I was a quack. So it was kind of tough, but I made it through. Whereas I've heard of other people who have a naturopathic bent, they go into medicine first, and they just get so bombarded because there's a lot of scare tactics and peer pressure and hazing that goes on in medical school to try to make everybody conform.
You said the word hazing. You really mean hazing?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I remember one of my fellow students, he didn't like the wording of the Hippocratic Oath, and he complained about it, and they almost threw him out of medical school.
Wow. What do you think about the Hippocratic Oath?
Well, I haven't read it in a long time. I know when I didn't go to my graduation ceremony, but when I went to pick up my degree, they made me say the Hippocratic Oath, and I crossed my fingers behind my back because it says you must uphold the institute, you must support your fellow doctors. It was like a a recommendation to, ignore society, but just attend to your peers.
I thought the Hippocratic Oath originally, correct me if I'm wrong, was about first doing no harm.
That's one of the first sentences, but then it deteriorates after that.
I hear you. I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
I know. Nobody does.
Years ago, I had taken some tests for thyroid by this supposed complementary medicine doctor in California. I went, I paid, and she refused to give me the results of my thyroid tests over the phone. I had to come pay another $250 to get them.
Oh, my God.
And I asked her to please call me on the phone and tell me, and she refused to do it. And I said, you've taken the Hippocratic Oath, and what you're doing is wrong. You better give me my results of that test. Mm-hmm. So she called me in, didn't charge me, gave me the results of the test, and fired me as a patient.
Yeah. Wow.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I know. It's really gotten turned around. I went to medical school in the mid-'70s, and there's so many things like there were no informed consents back then that people had to sign, and most of the time people who had cancer, they weren't told they had cancer. Now, that sounds bad, but then when the informed consent process came in, it was like even if you had a 2% chance of having cancer, the doctor would blatantly just throw that at you and leave the person just stunned, or tell you what horrible things were going to happen to you, which, when that's in your mind, it kind of attracts that type of thing. So the business of treating with drugs, we were told, well, you give a drug just for a short term and until the body recuperates and is able to take care of itself. But now drugs are being used like lifelong, and mainly to benefit the pharmaceutical industry.
Can you explain to us your translation, your perspective on what homeopathy is and how homeopathy is part of your work?
Right. Well, homeopathy is a dilution, an infinitesimal dilution of a plant or mineral or an animal. And to my mind, it's like they do provings of these substances, these dilute substances, and then write out the proving. So if you take a diluted arsenic, then the person will have drooling and I think eye pain, different symptoms, paranoia. And so then that's all written down. The homeopath memorizes all these provings, and when they see a person with drooling and paranoia and eye pain, they'll say, oh, that suits homeopathic arsenicum, so I'll give them that. And then it's like on,
It's called the law of similars, right?
The law of similar symptoms to the symptoms that the homeopathic solution creates. But it's also almost like a vaccination where you give a little bit of something and it stimulates the immune system to take care of the problem. I remember one study where a group of rats were given arsenic, and then they were divided in two, and after the arsenic was completely out of their bodies, one of the groups was given homeopathic arsenic, and they started excreting more arsenic. So it's like the remedy reminded the body that there was still a poison in it, and it helped it excrete the poison.
Isn't that unbelievable? I mean, in a way, it's so subtle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these dilutions are really subtle, aren't they?
They are, but I mean, if you think of it, Kim, the hormones in our body are at very tiny, dilutions themselves. So the body is used to working on very infinitesimal dilutions. So it's quite capable of reacting at those levels.
Why do you think homeopathy is so mysterious to the average person?
The main argument I hear from the allopaths is that how can something so dilute do anything? And that's where their comprehension ends. They don't see the results. They don't see the the infants and the animals being treated by it and benefiting. They don't see that it works because they don't know how it works.
Is Bach flower a homeopathic remedy?
Not really. It's mainly just